Hello there, and welcome to the Sleepless Scientist, a quiet place in the cosmos where your thoughts can unwind, and knowledge becomes a soft lullaby for the night. Tonight's journey will take us into a question that has lingered like a distant echo across the stars. The Fermi Paradox, and a gentle possibility hidden within it. What if advanced civilizations didn't vanish into space, but slipped along the currents of time? Before you settle in and get cozy, I'd love if you could take a moment to like this video and subscribe. Only if you truly find these quiet explorations enjoyable. And when you're ready, leave a comment to let me know where in the world you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. It's always such a joy to imagine these stories drifting across time zones, meeting you wherever night happens to be. Now, feel free to dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for a soft background hum, and let's gently begin. If your mind wanders, that's perfectly fine. Let it drift. We're not in a hurry. We'll be here, quietly unfolding the idea together. For a long time, we've searched the sky with radios and telescopes, expecting a signal, any signal, that says we're not alone. We've listened for beeps and patterns, whispers and pulses. And yet, the universe remains calm. Not empty, perhaps, but calm. Tonight we'll explore whether that calm is telling us something unexpected. Not about distance, but about timing. Not about absence, but about being out of step. On any clear night, you can look up and see it for yourself. A sky scattered with points of light, each one a sun in its own right, many of them older than our planet. Some far older than life itself. It's a view that feels both comforting and unsettling. Comforting because it reminds us we're part of something vast. Unsettling because it's so very quiet. This quiet is not the peaceful hush of snowfall or the soft pause between breaths. It's a silence that seems to stretch across unimaginable distances and eras. For generations, we assumed that such a universe would be alive with conversation, with signals crossing the dark like ships passing lanterns at sea. After all, when you count the stars, hundreds of billions in our galaxy alone, and then remember that many of those stars host planets, the expectation feels almost reasonable. And yet, when we listen, we hear nothing back. At first, this absence didn't trouble us much. Our tools were young, our reach was small, but over time, something changed. We discovered planets circling other stars in great variety, hot worlds skimming close to their suns, cold giants drifting far away, rocky planets not so different from Earth. Each discovery was like finding another house on a street we thought was empty. The neighbourhood kept growing, the light stayed off. That's when the silence began to feel puzzling. It's tempting to imagine that the universe is simply empty of advanced life, that intelligence is rare and fleeting. But that explanation has grown less satisfying as our knowledge has expanded. The universe looks ready. Not perfect, not gentle, but ready. Ready in the way a long coastline is ready for ships, or a night sky is ready for constellations. This mismatch between expectation and experience is what gives rise to the quiet question at the heart of our journey. It isn't asked with alarm and it isn't shouted. It arrives more like a thought you have while lying awake, staring at the ceiling, noticing that something doesn't quite add up. If the universe is so old and so large and so filled with places where life could arise, why does it feel as though we're listening to an empty room? Traditionally, we've framed this as a problem of space. Perhaps civilizations are too far away. Perhaps signals fade before reaching us. Perhaps we're looking in the wrong direction, or listening at the wrong frequency. These ideas are sensible, and many of them remain possible. But tonight, we'll allow ourselves to consider a gentler shift in perspective. What if the quiet has less to do with where others are and more to do with when they are? Time, after all, is not just a ticking clock, it's a flow, a direction. a current that carries moments forward and never quite lets them pile up in the same place. Two events can occupy the same location and still never meet, simply because they happen at different times. A city street at noon is a different world than that same street at midnight. In that sense, presence doesn't require distance to vanish. It only requires synchronization. As we begin this exploration, it helps to release the urgency that often surrounds questions of extraterrestrial life. This is not a race to discovery, nor a search for reassurance. It's a quiet consideration of how vast histories might unfold without overlapping, how civilizations could rise, learn, and move on without ever sharing a single moment with us. The silence, then, may not be a failure of the universe to produce life. It may be a reflection of how life, once advanced enough, relates to time itself, not loudly, not carelessly, but with caution, and perhaps with a kind of patience that makes our brief moment of listening feel very small. For now, let that thought rest gently. The universe isn't speaking, but it may not be ignoring us either. It may simply be keeping its stories in a different chapter of time, one we haven't reached yet. The story begins, as many important stories do, not with a telescope or a rocket, but with a conversation. A small group of physicists gathered casually over lunch in the middle of the 20th century. No grand announcement, no raised voices, just people thinking out loud, as curious minds tend to do when they feel at ease with one another. At some point, the conversation drifted toward the possibility of life beyond Earth. This was not unusual. The universe was already known to be vast, and even then, it seemed unlikely that humanity would be its only thinking inhabitant. And then, almost absent-mindedly, Enrico Fermi asked a question that would outlive the lunch, the room, and eventually everyone present. Where is everybody? It wasn't meant to be profound. There was no dramatic pause, no expectation that the question would ripple through decades of science and philosophy. It was simply a moment of noticing something odd, a mismatch between what seemed likely and what appeared to be true. If intelligent life is common, and if technology advances with time, then the universe should not feel so quiet. Someone, somewhere, should have left a trace, a signal, a structure, a sign that says, in one form or another, we were here. That simple tension became known as the Fermi Paradox. Not a paradox in the sense of a logical trap, but more like a lingering discomfort, a sense that two reasonable ideas refuse to sit comfortably together. On one side, a universe that seems full of opportunity for life. On the other, a sky that offers no reply. For many years, the question was treated as a problem to be solved. Perhaps civilizations destroy themselves. Perhaps interstellar travel is too difficult. Perhaps intelligence is rare, or curiosity fades, or life prefers quiet corners we haven't looked into yet. These explanations are still discussed, and some may hold pieces of the truth. But tonight, we'll allow ourselves to approach the question differently. Instead of asking why no one has arrived, we'll ask what assumptions are quietly built into the question itself. When Fermi asked, "Where is everybody?" the unspoken meaning was, "Where are they now?" The word "where" carries a subtle bias. It points to space, distance, location. It assumes that if others exist, they should be somewhere we could, in principle, point to. But there is another word that often hides behind our questions without being named. That word is when. Imagine standing in a quiet train station late at night. You know trains pass through this place every day. You've seen the schedules. You've watched the crowds come and go. And yet, at this moment, the platforms are empty. The silence doesn't mean trains don't exist. It only means none are passing through now. The Fermi Paradox may be less like an abandoned station and more like a pause between arrivals. This idea doesn't require us to abandon science or stretch belief beyond reason. It simply asks us to widen the frame. Civilizations, like individuals, have lifespans. They emerge, change, and eventually move on. But unlike individuals, advanced civilizations may not remain anchored to a single moment in time. We often imagine progress as a straight road, a path that leads from simple tools to advanced machines, from early science to cosmic engineering. And along that road, we imagine civilizations spreading outward, filling space the way ink spreads across paper. But time does not behave like paper. It behaves more like a flowing river. Moments pass, conditions change, opportunities appear and disappear. A civilization that masters its environment may eventually turn inward or forward or somewhere we have no everyday language for. Seen this way, the silence stops feeling like a failure of expectation and starts to feel like a clue. Not a loud clue, not a flashing sign, but a gentle hint that we may be listening in the wrong way. The question, "Where is everybody?" assumes that advanced civilizations remain visible, that they broadcast, that they leave marks meant to be found. But what if advancement brings discretion rather than display? What if maturity favours stability over expansion? Even on Earth, we see small reflections of this idea. Early technologies were noisy, inefficient, and impossible to hide. Modern systems often become quieter, smaller, more subtle. The most powerful processes in your body, after all, make almost no sound at all. If this pattern holds beyond our planet, then the absence of obvious signals may not indicate emptiness. It may indicate refinement. As we sit with Fermi's question, it's worth noticing how it makes us feel. There is a temptation to hear loneliness in it, or even disappointment. But there is another possible tone: curiosity, unburdened by urgency. The kind of curiosity that doesn't demand answers right away. Perhaps the question lingers not because it exposes a problem with the universe, but because it exposes a habit in our thinking, a habit of expecting others to share our moment, our pace, our methods of being seen. In the quiet that follows Fermi's question, we don't need to rush toward conclusions. We can simply acknowledge that silence, like space itself, can mean many things. Sometimes it means absence, sometimes it means waiting, and sometimes it means that the conversation is happening on a timescale longer than a human lifetime. As this thought settles, we can allow the paradox to soften, not as something to be solved immediately, but as something to be lived with. A reminder that the universe may be full of stories that do not intersect with our own, at least not yet. For a while, scientists tried to meet the silence with numbers. If the universe wouldn't answer directly, perhaps it could be persuaded to speak through estimates and careful reasoning. This approach didn't come from cold calculation alone, but from a very human impulse, the desire to know whether our experience is typical or rare. Imagine standing on a beach for the first time, seeing thousands of shells scattered across the sand. You might reasonably assume that shells are common along this shore, even if you haven't counted them all. In much the same way, astronomers began to ask whether intelligence should be common in a universe filled with stars. This line of thinking led to what became known as the Drake equation. Despite its intimidating reputation, it was never meant to be a rigid formula or a final answer. It was more like a structured conversation, a way of breaking a big emotional question into smaller, friendlier pieces. At its heart, the equation asked a simple thing: how many civilizations might exist in our galaxy that are capable of communicating? To approach this, it invited us to think step by step. How many stars are born each year? How many of them have planets? How many of those planets could support life? How often does life become intelligent? How often does intelligence become technological? When spoken aloud like this, the equation stops feeling like mathematics and starts feeling like a story, a chain of possibilities, each one resting gently on the previous one. If even a few of those steps are generous, the final number grows surprisingly large. For a time, this was comforting. The universe seemed not just vast but populated, full of potential neighbours, full of voices that, statistically speaking, should exist somewhere out there. And yet, the silence remained. As the years passed, many of the early uncertainties in the equation began to shrink. We learned that planets are common, that stars like our Sun are not unusual, that rocky worlds exist in great abundance. Each discovery tightened the story, filling in once vague chapters with clearer details. The beach, it turned out, was even more crowded with shells than we first imagined. But one part of the equation remained stubbornly elusive. It wasn't about stars or planets or even life itself. It was about duration, about how long a civilization remains detectable, how long it sends signals, how long it occupies a technological phase that overlaps with our own. This is where time quietly enters the room. The Drake equation, for all its usefulness, treats time almost like an afterthought. It includes a term for how long civilizations last, but it doesn't truly explore what it means to last. It assumes that existence and visibility are the same thing, that being alive, being advanced, and being observable all happen together. But our own experience suggests otherwise. Think of how quickly technologies change. A device that feels revolutionary one decade becomes obsolete the next. Signals that once filled the air fade into silence as systems evolve. Even within a single human lifetime, methods of communication can appear and vanish entirely. If this happens on Earth in the span of decades, what might happen over centuries or millennia or longer? A civilization could exist for an extraordinarily long time and still pass through a relatively brief window, during which it produces signals we know how to detect. That window might open and close without ever overlapping with ours. In this light, the Drake equation doesn't fail. It simply tells an incomplete story. It counts houses, but not schedules. It maps the city, but not the times when the lights are on. This realization doesn't make the universe lonelier. If anything, it makes it richer. It suggests that the galaxy could be full of histories layered on top of one another, like pages in a book that are never open at the same time. There is a quiet humility in this idea. It reminds us that our moment, though precious to us, is not central by default. We're not standing at the peak of cosmic history looking out at everyone else. We're standing somewhere along a long path, looking sideways and wondering why we don't see others walking beside us. The numbers that once promised company were not wrong. They were simply incomplete. They spoke confidently about space, but whispered uncertainly about time. As this thought settles in, the equation transforms. It stops being a tool for prediction and becomes a mirror, reflecting our assumptions back to us, revealing how deeply we expect others to share our rhythm, our pace, our technological style. Perhaps the universe is not refusing to answer. Perhaps it is reminding us that counting alone cannot capture timing, that presence is not just about being somewhere, but about being there at the same moment. This doesn't diminish the value of searching, it refines it. It suggests that listening may require patience measured not just in years, but in perspectives. A willingness to accept that silence can coexist with abundance, just as an empty beach can exist between tides. For now, we can let the numbers rest. They have done their job. They have shown us that life is plausible, perhaps even common. What they have not shown us is how lives align across time, and that, quietly, may be where the real mystery has been waiting all along. Not long ago, The idea of planets around other stars was mostly hopeful speculation. We imagined them the way sailors once imagined distant shores, likely perhaps, but unseen. Then, slowly and patiently, the universe began to confirm what curiosity had suggested all along. Stars, it turns out, rarely travel alone. As our instruments improved, we started to notice tiny, regular dimmings in starlight, like a candle briefly shaded by a passing hand. These subtle flickers revealed worlds circling suns far beyond our own. Not one or two, but thousands. Each discovery felt less like a revelation, and more like a quiet nod from the cosmos, as if it were saying, yes, of course. The variety was striking. Some planets clung tightly to their stars, racing around them in days, bathed in relentless heat. Others wandered farther out, cold and slow, wrapped in thick atmospheres or icy shells. There were worlds larger than Jupiter and smaller than Earth, planets with skies of gas, oceans of unknown chemistry, and surfaces we can only imagine. And among them were rocky planets, not unlike our own, worlds that seemed comfortable at a distance from their stars where liquid water could exist. Not guaranteed, not promised, but possible. This realization shifted something fundamental. The universe was no longer a sparse place dotted with rare oases. It began to feel more like a city at night, where nearly every window could, in principle, hold a light. With each new discovery, the question subtly changed. It was no longer, are there places where life could arise? That seemed increasingly likely. The question became, if there are so many homes, why do none of them feel occupied? This is where the silence grows heavier, but also more interesting. A house can exist for decades without anyone inside it. A city can be full of buildings and still feel empty at dawn. Habitability, we learned, does not equal habitation. And even habitation does not guarantee communication. Life, especially intelligent life, is not just a matter of conditions, it is a matter of timing. On Earth, life appeared relatively quickly once conditions allowed it. But intelligence, the kind that builds tools, asks questions and sends messages, took billions of years longer. And even then, for most of that time, it remained quiet. No radios, no signals, no outward-facing presence at all. If we were observing Earth from afar during most of its history, we would see a living planet and hear nothing. This perspective changes how we interpret the quiet beyond our world. The universe may be filled with planets that are alive in subtle ways, or on the verge of awakening, or already past their loudest phase. Some may host ecosystems that never develop technology. Others may develop intelligence and then choose paths that leave little trace. Even now, our own planet has begun to grow quieter in certain ways. As technology advances, efficiency increases. Signals become more targeted, less wasteful. The loud broadcasts of early communication fade into narrow beams and private channels. Noise gives way to precision. If this is a common trajectory, then the window during which a civilization is both technologically capable and loudly visible may be surprisingly brief. The discovery of countless worlds didn't answer the silence, it reframed it. It told us that the universe is not barren, it is prepared, it has laid out countless stages. What it hasn't guaranteed is that the performances happen at the same time. There is something oddly calming in this realization. The quiet does not demand despair, it invites patience. It suggests that our expectations may be shaped too strongly by our own brief chapter. We tend to imagine ourselves standing at the center of a story, looking outward. But the universe is older and more patient than that. Its stories overlap imperfectly, like echoes that rarely coincide. When we listen and hear nothing, we are not necessarily hearing emptiness. We may be hearing the pause between verses. This doesn't mean we should stop looking or listening. On the contrary, it encourages a different kind of attention. One that is less anxious for confirmation and more open to subtlety. One that understands that readiness does not imply immediacy. The sky above us is full of homes, that much we now know. What remains uncertain is how many are currently occupied in a way that intersects with us. Here, now, listening. And perhaps that uncertainty is not a flaw in our understanding, but a reminder that the universe operates on timescales that make patience not just a virtue, but a necessity. As this thought settles, the silence becomes less stark. It softens. It becomes a space of possibility rather than absence, a quiet that holds stories we may not yet be ready to hear, or perhaps stories that are waiting for a different moment to be told. When people first encounter the idea of the Great Filter, it often arrives with a sense of unease. The name itself sounds harsh, almost mechanical, as if the universe were sorting civilizations with cold efficiency, allowing a few through and discarding the rest. But when we slow down and look at it more carefully, the idea becomes less frightening and more reflective. The Great Filter is not a wall, it is more like a narrowing passage. Imagine a long path that begins wide and open. Many travellers step onto it. Some turn back early, others wander off into side trails, and as the path continues it gradually becomes thinner, steeper, more demanding. Fewer travellers remain, not because they were pushed away, but because the journey itself requires increasingly rare combinations of circumstance, patience, and adaptation. In the context of life in the universe, this path begins with simple ingredients, chemistry, energy, stable environments. These seem to be fairly common. We now know that planets form easily, and that complex molecules appear wherever conditions allow them to linger. In that early stretch of the path, the passage is wide. The next stages grow more selective. Life must not only appear but persist. It must survive changing climates, shifting stars, and its own internal experiments. On Earth, this took an astonishingly long time. For billions of years, life remained simple, quiet, and content to repeat familiar patterns. Only much later did intelligence emerge, and even then intelligence did not immediately turn outward. Toolmaking, language, art, and curiosity all took time to intertwine. Technology did not rush forward in a straight line. It hesitated, paused, and sometimes slipped backward. Each of these stages narrows the path. Traditionally, the Great Filter has been discussed as a kind of danger point, a stage so difficult that most civilizations fail to pass it. Nuclear war, ecological collapse, runaway technology, these are often cited as possibilities, and they may indeed be part of the story. But there is another way to understand the filter, a quieter way. What if passing through the filter does not always mean surviving catastrophe? What if it sometimes means changing so completely that a civilization no longer looks like what we expect? Consider how a caterpillar becomes a butterfly. From the outside, the caterpillar disappears. It dissolves into something unrecognizable, reorganizing itself at a level we rarely think about. If we were only looking for crawling shapes on leaves, we might conclude that the caterpillar had failed, that it had vanished, but it has not failed, it has transformed. In this light, the Great Filter may not simply remove civilizations from existence, it may remove them from visibility. As technology matures, priorities shift. Survival becomes less about expansion and more about balance, less about broadcasting presence and more about maintaining stability. A civilization that lasts a very long time may learn that being loud is risky, inefficient, or simply unnecessary. Time plays a subtle role here. The longer a civilization exists, the more chances it has to change its relationship with the universe. Early stages may be noisy and experimental. Later stages may be quiet and refined. What we interpret as disappearance may be a transition into a form that leaves a little trace. This perspective gently rearranges our fears. Instead of asking whether the great filter lies ahead of us like an unavoidable cliff, we can ask a different question. What kind of transformation might eventually carry us beyond our current way of being seen? It is also possible that the filter lies not at a single point, but spread thinly across time, a gradual thinning rather than a sudden cut. Civilizations may pass through many small filters, each one encouraging a shift towards subtlety. In this view, the universe does not feel hostile. It feels patient. It allows countless attempts, countless variations, but it does not guarantee overlap. A civilization may flourish for millions of years and still share only a fleeting moment with another that happens to rise much earlier or much later. Two fires burning brightly, but at different times, never lighting the same sky. This idea brings us back to the silence, but now it sounds different. Less like a warning, more like an echo from other eras. If advanced civilizations have passed through their own filters long before we began listening, their absence does not mean they were erased. It may mean they moved beyond the phase we are currently able to recognize. And if some are yet to come, still far ahead on the path, then the quiet we hear now is simply the space between footsteps. The great filter, then, is not necessarily something to dread. It is a reminder that survival may involve letting go of visibility, that longevity may require restraint, and that time, more than distance, shapes who meets whom in the universe. As this thought settles, the filter becomes less of a gatekeeper and more of a teacher. It suggests that if we wish to endure, we may one day need to learn how to exist without constantly announcing ourselves. For now, we stand at an early stretch of the path, curious, listening, learning what the quiet might be trying to tell us, not about failure, but about the many ways civilizations can continue without leaving a shout behind. When we imagine survival, we often picture continuity, staying where we are, remaining recognizable, carrying our familiar shapes and habits forward year after year. But survival, in its deeper sense, does not always look like preservation. Sometimes it looks like departure. Not departure in the dramatic sense of rockets leaving planets or ships vanishing into the dark. A quieter departure. One that happens not across distance but across time. On Earth, we see small echoes of this idea everywhere. Languages survive, but not always in their original form. They drift, merge, soften, and change until the old versions are no longer spoken aloud. Cultures persist, but rarely remain fixed. Traditions that once defined entire societies become faint traces, remembered more than lived. From a distance, it can look like disappearance. From within, it feels like transformation. If this pattern holds for civilizations as a whole, then survival may eventually require a change in how a society occupies time. Early stages of civilization are tightly bound to the present. Immediate needs dominate. Energy is spent reacting, expanding, experimenting. There is urgency in everything, but as knowledge accumulates, urgency begins to fade. A civilization that has learned how to manage its environment, its resources, and its internal conflicts may no longer be driven by constant motion. Instead, it may become focused on stability, on minimizing risk, on avoiding irreversible mistakes. At this stage, time itself becomes something to be handled carefully. Rather than racing forward blindly, such a civilization might begin to treat time as a landscape, something with contours, currents, and regions to be navigated thoughtfully. The present moment, once the only place life could exist, becomes just one location among many. This is where the idea of leaving the present quietly enters the conversation. Leaving the present does not necessarily mean travelling freely backward and forward like characters in a story. It may mean slowing certain processes down, preserving information across long spans, choosing to exist in states that are less exposed to sudden change. In this sense, stepping away from the present could be a form of refuge. The present is noisy, unstable, filled with unpredictability. Stars flare, planets shift, civilizations collide with their own creations. For a society that has learned patience, remaining fully immersed in such volatility may no longer be desirable. So instead of expanding outward or broadcasting inward, it may choose a different path, one that reduces interaction with the ever-changing surface of time. From our perspective, such a choice would look like disappearance. We search the present for signs of others, but they are no longer there in the way we expect, not destroyed, not hidden, simply elsewhere along the timeline. This idea does not require advanced machines beyond imagination. It only requires a shift in priorities, a willingness to value long-term continuity over immediate presence. Think of a seed buried deep in the ground. From the surface, the field appears empty, silent. But beneath the soil, something waits, not gone, not inactive, simply aligned with a different moment. If civilizations can learn to align themselves with time in this way, entering states of reduced activity, extended preservation, or delayed expression, then the universe could be full of life that is not currently speaking. This reframes the silence once again. It becomes less like abandonment and more like dormancy, less like extinction and more like patience stretched across eras. There is also a comforting symmetry to this idea. It suggests that advanced civilizations do not dominate the universe by force or volume. They endure by restraint, by choosing when to be present and when not to be. Such a choice would naturally reduce overlap. Two civilizations might both exist for immense spans of time and still never encounter one another if their periods of outward engagement do not coincide. The universe, in that case, is not empty. It is asynchronous. As listeners, as observers, we find ourselves tuned to a very narrow slice of time, a brief window during which our technology is young, our signals are loud, and our curiosity is expansive. We look outward and assume that others should be doing the same right now, but maturity may bring a different relationship with curiosity, a quieter one. If leaving the present is part of long-term survival, then the absence of others becomes easier to understand. We're not late to the conversation, nor are we early. We're simply speaking during a moment when few others are choosing to speak at all. This does not diminish our significance, it contextualizes it. Our era becomes a phase, bright, questioning, temporary, one that may one day give way to something calmer and less visible. For now, the present belongs to us, and that may be exactly how it is meant to be. As this thought settles, the silence no longer presses in. It opens up. It becomes a space that holds both past and future, layered beyond our immediate reach. A reminder that survival may not always mean staying in sight, and that endurance may sometimes require stepping gently out of the moment we call now. It's tempting to imagine time as simply another direction, left and right, forward and back, past and future arranged like rooms along a hallway. This picture feels comfortable because it borrows from something familiar, space. But time does not behave the way space does. You can step left, then step right and return to where you started. You can climb a hill and walk back down again. Space allows reversals. Time, however, resists them. Once a moment passes, it does not wait for us. It moves on quietly and without apology. One way to feel this difference is through change. A dropped cup shatters on the floor, but it never gathers itself back together. A warm room slowly cools, but it never warms itself spontaneously. Memories form, but they only ever point backward. These everyday experiences reveal something subtle but important. Time has a preferred direction. This direction is often described as a flow, but it may be more accurate to think of it as a gentle slope. Everything slides downhill, from less change to more change, from order toward disorder. Not abruptly, not violently, just steadily. This is why time feels different from space. Space lets us wander. Time carries us. For young civilizations, this difference may not matter much. The present feels like the only place that exists. Everything important seems to happen now. Decisions are made quickly. Consequences are immediate. Time is something to race against. But as knowledge grows, the nature of time becomes harder to ignore. An advanced civilization would eventually notice that many of its greatest challenges are not spatial, but temporal. How to preserve knowledge across generations. How to avoid mistakes that echo far into the future. How to maintain continuity without freezing progress. At that stage, time stops being a background detail and becomes a central concern. Unlike space, time cannot be navigated freely. You cannot simply step sideways into yesterday. Any attempt to work with time must respect its asymmetry, its refusal to run backward in the way our intuition sometimes wants it to. This matters deeply for the question we're exploring. If advanced civilizations exist, and if they learn to interact with time in any meaningful way, they would have to do so carefully. Not by forcing reversals, but by understanding currents, by finding regions of stability, by learning when to act and when to wait. Think of a river. You can cross it. You can build along its banks. You can even redirect small channels. But if you try to reverse its flow entirely, the effort becomes enormous, unstable, and likely destructive. The river resists. Time may behave in much the same way. This suggests that any civilization that endures long enough to understand time deeply would develop a respectful relationship with it. One based on cooperation rather than control. Such a civilization might learn how to place itself in calmer stretches of the current, where change happens slowly and predictably. From our perspective, this would look like absence. We search for activity in the fastest moving parts of time, the noisy present, full of rapid change and experimentation. But advanced civilizations may have learned that this is the most dangerous place to linger. The present is where accidents happen, where small errors can grow quickly, where instability thrives. Choosing to step away from that zone would not require dramatic technology. It would require patience and foresight, a willingness to trade immediacy for longevity. This reframes time travel in a gentler way, not as leaping freely across centuries, but as learning how to dwell in quieter temporal environments, not moving backward or forward recklessly, but positioning oneself where the flow is slow and manageable. Such positioning would naturally reduce visibility. A civilization living in a low-change state would emit fewer signals. It would interact less with the surrounding universe. It would appear still, even if internally rich and active. To us, listening from a rapidly changing present, such stillness would register as silence. This idea also explains why the universe might not be filled with obvious relics of past civilizations. Time, with its steady slope toward change, erases loud structures quickly. What remains are subtle imprints, patterns, not monuments. If advanced civilizations understand this, they may deliberately avoid leaving traces that decay unpredictably. Instead, they may encode their existence in ways that persist quietly, beyond our current methods of detection. In this light, the silence becomes less mysterious. It becomes consistent. We are not failing to find others because they are hiding from us. We may be failing to recognize the kind of presence that survives longest. A presence shaped by time, not space. As this thought settles, time itself begins to feel less like a barrier and more like a guide. It reminds us that visibility is temporary, but continuity can be chosen. That the loudest moments in history are rarely the longest lasting. For now, we remain in the energetic, turbulent stretch of time where curiosity spills outward. We look for companions who share our urgency, but the universe may be populated by travelers who have learned to let urgency go. And so, the quiet continues, not as a void, but as a sign of civilizations that have learned something we're only beginning to understand. That time is not just another direction to move through, but a force to live alongside, gently and with care. When we picture travel, we usually imagine movement across distance, roads stretching outward, ships crossing seas, spacecraft drifting between stars. This image is deeply rooted in how our bodies experience the world. To go somewhere, we cross the space between here and there, but the universe does not always agree with our instincts. On very large scales, space and time behave less like a rigid grid and more like a flexible fabric. Heavy objects press into it. Motion follows curves rather than straight lines. Paths that look long from one perspective can appear surprisingly short from another. You don't need advanced mathematics to feel this idea. You've experienced it every time you folded a piece of paper. 2 points that were once far apart suddenly touch, not because they moved, but because the surface between them changed shape. In the universe, gravity plays the role of the fold. Stars, planets, and galaxies gently reshape the space and time around them. Light follows these curves. Clocks tick at slightly different rates depending on where they sit. Time itself stretches and compresses, not dramatically, not perceptibly to us, but consistently. For a young civilization, these effects are curiosities, interesting facts, subtle corrections. But for an advanced civilization, they may become pathways. Instead of asking how far away a destination is, such a civilization might ask how the terrain between moments can be shaped, how the flow of time can be guided into gentler channels, how to choose routes that minimize exposure to chaos and change. This is where the idea of folded paths becomes meaningful. Rather than racing across space at ever-increasing speeds, an advanced civilization might learn to navigate along regions where space and time naturally curve. These routes would not look like highways or tunnels. They would feel more like drifting along a current that already exists. From the outside, this kind of movement would be almost invisible. There would be no bright engines, no long-lasting signals, no obvious signs of transit. Movement would be subtle, integrated into the structure of the universe itself. A civilization using such paths would not announce its presence. It would simply arrive or depart without fanfare. This may help explain why we see no clear evidence of interstellar traffic. We're watching the sky for fireworks, while others may be travelling by moonlight. It's important to keep this idea grounded. We are not suggesting that time can be twisted at will, or that the universe offers shortcuts everywhere. These folded paths, if they exist at all, would be rare, delicate, and difficult to access. They would require deep understanding and careful balance. But even the possibility changes how we interpret absence. If advanced civilizations have learned to move in ways that blend seamlessly with the fabric of space and time, then their journeys would leave little trace. They would not need to cross the vast distances we imagine, because distance itself would lose some of its meaning. A journey measured in years for us might be experienced as something entirely different for them. Not faster in a dramatic sense, but gentler. Less exposed to the harshness of open space. less likely to disturb the surrounding environment, and perhaps most importantly, such movement would not require staying anchored to the present. A civilization capable of navigating folded paths could choose when to emerge, when to interact, when to remain quietly out of phase with the turbulent surface of time. From our perspective, they would seem to vanish. From theirs, they would simply be elsewhere along a calmer route. This reframes the idea of time travel once again, not as leaping freely across history, but as selecting pathways that naturally connect different moments. Not forcing time to obey, but learning how to move with it. There is a humility built into this picture. It suggests that the most enduring civilizations do not impose themselves on the universe. They listen, they adapt, they align their motion with structures that already exist, and in doing so, they may become almost indistinguishable from the background. We tend to equate presence with activity, with signals, with noise, but the universe does not require noise to function. Its most powerful processes often unfold quietly, over spans of time that dwarf our attention. If advanced civilizations have discovered this, then their absence from our observations becomes easier to understand. They are not missing, they are simply moving in ways that do not disturb the stillness we see. As this idea settles, our expectations soften. We no longer need to imagine fleets of ships crossing the galaxy or monuments left behind for us to find. Presence can be subtle, movement can be quiet, endurance can look like stillness. The universe, patient and curved, offers many ways to exist. We are only familiar with the loudest ones. For now, we remain travellers who walk the long way around, counting distance and time separately. But somewhere, perhaps, others have learned that the shortest path is not always the straightest, and that the gentlest journeys leave no footprints at all. Whenever we think about time in unusual ways, one concern rises almost immediately to the surface: cause and effect. The comforting idea that actions lead forward, that consequences follow decisions in a sensible order. It's one of the few structures we rely on without thinking about it. The invisible frame holding everyday life together. You plant a seed, and later a plant grows. You speak a word, and afterwards someone hears it. The order matters, and because it matters, we rarely question it. But when we imagine civilizations interacting deeply with time, this order begins to feel fragile. What happens if causes and effects begin to blur? If events circle back on themselves? If history becomes something that can be rearranged? Rather than opening the door to chaos, the universe appears to respond to these questions with quiet firmness. In our best understanding, time is not easily bent into contradictions. It allows flexibility but not disorder. It stretches and curves gently, but it resists tearing. Whenever nature permits something unusual, it often does so under strict conditions, ensuring that the overall structure remains intact. Think of a spinning top. As long as it spins smoothly, it remains upright. Push it too hard, and it wobbles. Push it further still, and it falls. Stability comes not from force, but from balance. Time seems to behave in a similar way. If advanced civilizations learn to interact with time, they would quickly discover that dramatic interference is unstable. Attempts to rewrite outcomes, to insert large changes into the flow of history, would ripple outward unpredictably. Small disturbances might grow large. Quiet adjustments might remain contained. Over time, such a civilization would likely learn a simple lesson. The safest way to exist within time is not to disrupt it. This idea gives rise to a natural kind of restraint. Not a rule imposed from outside, but one learned through experience. Interact gently, or not at all. Observe more than intervene. Preserve continuity rather than rearrange it. From our perspective, this restraint would look like invisibility. We often imagine that if time travel were possible, it would be obvious. That history would be crowded with visitors, artifacts, and unexplained interventions. But that assumption depends on a very human preference for drama. In reality, stability favors quietness. A civilization that has learned how fragile timelines can be would likely avoid leaving footprints in the past, not because of fear, but because of understanding. Interference introduces risk. Observation does not. In this way, the absence of clear temporal visitors becomes evidence not of impossibility, but of caution. The universe may not allow paradoxes to accumulate, not through forceful prohibition, but through natural instability. Paths that create contradictions simply do not hold. They collapse, fade, or correct themselves long before becoming visible. This would encourage a particular style of temporal navigation, one that blends into the background, leaving history unchanged on the surface, while allowing movement beneath it. Such movement would be nearly impossible for us to detect. We look for sharp anomalies, sudden changes, loud disruptions, but a civilization that respects the quiet rules of cause and effect would avoid all of these. Its presence would be subtle, like a breeze that moves through tall grass without bending a single blade out of place. This idea also reshapes how we think about responsibility. If advanced civilizations understand that time is delicate, then restraint becomes a moral choice as well as a practical one. To exist across eras without harming them requires patience, humility, and an acceptance of limits. It suggests that maturity, at a cosmic scale, looks less like control and more like care. In this context, the silence surrounding us feels less eerie. It feels intentional. The universe is not chaotic because its most enduring inhabitants have learned how to remain unseen. And perhaps that is not a failure of imagination, but a success of wisdom. We often ask why no one has reached out, why no one has introduced themselves, why no one has altered our history in obvious ways. But these questions assume that visibility is desirable. A civilization that has endured long enough to understand time's fragility may see things differently. It may value continuity over recognition, stability over contact. For such a civilization, the highest achievement would not be to be noticed, but to persist without causing harm. This brings us back once again to the quiet sky. The absence of disruption does not mean absence of presence. It may mean that the universe's oldest travelers have learned how to move without leaving scars, how to exist without breaking the delicate sequence of cause and effect that allows stories, like ours, to unfold at all. As this thought settles, the silence becomes almost reassuring. It suggests a universe governed not by chaos, but by quiet rules that favour balance. A universe where time can be explored, but only by those willing to treat it gently. And in such a universe, the lack of obvious visitors is not a mystery. It is a sign that someone, somewhere, has learned to listen to time rather than shout over it. As we move deeper into this quiet line of thought, it becomes easier to let go of one persistent assumption, that advanced civilizations, if they exist, would naturally want to be seen. That visibility is a sign of success. That growth always leads outward, louder and brighter. But when we look closely at our own history, a different pattern begins to appear. Early stages of development are often noisy. New technologies announce themselves boldly. Early experiments leave messes behind. Mistakes are frequent, and lessons are learned the hard way. There is enthusiasm, urgency, and a desire to prove existence through action. Maturity, however, often looks very different. A skilled musician does not play every note at full volume. A seasoned speaker knows when silence carries more meaning than words. In many areas of life, mastery expresses itself not through excess, but through restraint. It is reasonable to imagine that civilizations follow a similar arc. An advanced civilization, one that has endured long enough to understand the delicate balance of cause and effect, may come to see the universe as something that must be handled gently, not conquered, not reshaped recklessly, simply lived within, with care. This is where the idea sometimes described as a temporal prime directive quietly fits, not as a strict rule or an imposed law, but as a natural strategy for survival. Interference carries risk. Every action taken across time introduces the possibility of unintended consequences. Even small changes can ripple outward, growing in ways that are difficult to predict. A civilization that has witnessed enough near misses, enough fragile equilibria, would likely learn this lesson deeply. Stability, once achieved, becomes precious. Instead of experimenting loudly, such a civilization might choose observation. Instead of broadcasting its presence, it might choose patience, not because it fears being discovered, but because it understands how easily complexity can unravel. From our perspective, this choice would look like absence. We search the universe for signs of ambition, expansion, colonization, communication. But advanced civilizations may no longer define success in those terms. Their ambitions may have turned inward, toward continuity rather than growth, toward preservation rather than reach. Silence in this context is not emptiness. It is discipline. It is the decision not to disturb a system that is working, not to insert oneself into timelines unnecessarily, not to turn curiosity into disruption. This reframing matters because it removes the need for darker explanations. We do not have to imagine that civilizations routinely destroy themselves, or that the universe is hostile to intelligence. We can imagine something quieter and perhaps more hopeful, a universe where intelligence learns restraint. This restraint would naturally limit interaction. Civilizations that value stability would avoid drawing attention, avoid interference, and avoid actions that could cascade unpredictably. Over long spans of time, they would become difficult to detect, not because they're hiding, but because they're careful. It is worth noticing how familiar this pattern already feels. The most stable systems in nature often operate invisibly. The processes that regulate climate, sustain ecosystems, or maintain balance within living bodies do not announce themselves. They work continuously and quietly, noticed only when something goes wrong. If advanced civilizations operate in a similar way, then our expectation of obvious signs may be misplaced. We are listening for noise in a universe that may reward quiet. This perspective also softens the emotional edge of the silence. It allows us to interpret the absence of contact not as rejection, but as a sign of maturity elsewhere. Others may exist and may even be aware of us, but choose not to interfere with our unfolding story. Observation does not require interruption. A civilization that understands time deeply would recognize that every society needs space to grow, to make mistakes, to find its own balance. Intervening too early or too loudly could do more harm than good. In that sense, silence can be an act of respect. This does not mean that advanced civilizations are distant, cold, or indifferent. It means they may operate on principles shaped by long experience, principles that prioritize continuity over curiosity and patience over presence. From our position, still early in our technological story, this can feel unsettling. We want confirmation. We want reassurance. We want to know that others are out there. But there is another way to read the quiet. Perhaps the universe is not ignoring us. Perhaps it is waiting. waiting for us to reach a stage where we too understand the value of restraint, where we recognize that the loudest phase of a civilization may not be its longest, and that endurance often requires learning when not to act. If this is the case, then the silence we hear is not a verdict. It is an invitation to imagine a future where intelligence does not need to announce itself to exist. As this idea settles, the universe begins to feel less lonely and more thoughtful, less empty and more composed. A place where advanced civilizations, having learned hard lessons about time and consequence, move quietly through existence, present, careful, and unseen. And perhaps one day, far in our own future, we may understand why. From time to time, history leaves us with a faint sense of unease, not because something is clearly wrong, but because something feels just a little out of place. A detail that doesn't quite settle, a question that lingers longer than expected. These moments are rare, but they capture our attention because they interrupt the smooth story we like to tell about the past. We imagine history as a clean sequence, events following one another in orderly fashion, each cause producing a clear effect. Most of the time, this picture works well enough, but occasionally the picture blurs. An artifact appears without a clear explanation. A written account feels incomplete. A technological leap seems unusually sudden when viewed from a distance. In these moments, the imagination stirs. We wonder whether something has been missed, whether a chapter has been lost, whether the past holds more than we have yet uncovered. It is important to approach these feelings gently. History, after all, is not a perfect record. It is a mosaic assembled from fragments, documents that survived by chance, materials that resisted decay, stories that were deemed worth preserving. Much of what once existed has been erased by time, not by design but by entropy and neglect. Most historical mysteries, when examined patiently, dissolve, new evidence appears, context fills in the gaps. What once seemed strange becomes ordinary once we understand the constraints and customs of the era. The unknown becomes known, and the sense of misalignment fades. This pattern is worth remembering, especially when we are tempted to reach for extraordinary explanations. The human mind is naturally drawn to mystery. When a puzzle resists easy resolution, imagination steps in to complete the picture. This is not a flaw, it is a creative instinct. But it can sometimes lead us to confuse absence of explanation with presence of intention. In the context of our broader exploration, this distinction matters deeply. If advanced civilizations were capable of interacting with time, we might expect history to be filled with obvious disruptions, clear signs of intervention, events that stand out sharply, refusing all mundane explanation. But that is not what we see. Instead, we see a past that is remarkably consistent. Complex, yes, messy, often, but largely coherent. Changes unfold gradually. Technologies evolve through recognizable steps. Cultures adapt over time, influenced by geography, resources, and human choices. This consistency suggests restraint. If something unusual has ever brushed against our history, it has done so lightly that its presence is indistinguishable from the natural uncertainty of incomplete records. And this too aligns with the idea of disciplined civilizations. If interaction across time is possible, and if it carries risks, then minimizing footprints would be essential. Interventions would need to be subtle enough to avoid altering the course of events in visible ways. From this perspective, the lack of clear anomalies becomes meaningful. History does not look like a landscape repeatedly reshaped by outside hands. It looks like a river that meanders according to terrain and gravity, sometimes forming unexpected bends, but always following underlying rules. The few moments that continue to feel strange are often those where information is missing, not those where information contradicts itself. A silence in the record is not the same as an intrusion into it. This invites a more humble posture toward the past. Instead of asking what forces might have interfered, we can ask what knowledge has yet to be uncovered. Instead of assuming intention, we can acknowledge uncertainty. There's also a psychological comfort in this approach. Treating anomalies as questions rather than answers keeps us grounded. It allows curiosity without fear. It prevents us from turning every gap into a threat, or every mystery into evidence of control beyond our understanding. In a universe governed by gentle rules and quiet discipline, the most likely form of interaction is one that blends seamlessly into the background. One that leaves history intact, allowing civilizations to develop according to their own rhythms. Seen this way, history's occasional rough edges do not hint at manipulation. They hint at the limits of preservation and the vastness of time. And perhaps that is enough. We do not need history to contain hidden visitors in order for the universe to be rich. We do not need proof of interference to imagine advanced civilizations. Their absence from the past may be the strongest indication of their care. As this thought settles, the past feels less haunted and more human. Full of unanswered questions, yes, but questions born of complexity, not intrusion. History remains ours, shaped by countless choices, accidents, and adaptations. And if others have ever watched from afar, they have done so with a light touch, leaving us to find our own way. In the end, the moments that feel out of place may not be signs of something added, but reminders of how much has simply been lost. And in that loss, there is room for imagination, but also for patience. The past does not need to be explained all at once. Like the universe itself, it reveals its patterns slowly, to those willing to listen without rushing to conclusions. There is a certain kind of mystery that feels electric. It sparks excitement, speculation, and sometimes unease. And few scientific ideas have inspired this feeling as strongly as the strange connections found at the smallest scales of nature. You may have heard them described as particles that seem to know about one another instantly, even when separated by great distances. A connection that appears to ignore space entirely. To the imagination, this can sound like a secret channel, an invisible wire stretched across the universe, carrying information faster than anything should. It's easy to see why this idea captures attention, but tonight we will slow it down, not to diminish its wonder, but to understand it more clearly and more peacefully. These connections are best understood not as messages being sent, but as shared conditions. Like two pages torn from the same book, carrying the same story not because one is telling the other, but because they were written together from the start. When one page is read, the other does not change. It simply reveals what was already there. This distinction matters. In everyday life, communication involves signals. A sound travels through air. Light travels from a screen to your eyes. There is movement, delay, and direction. With these deep connections, none of that happens. Nothing travels. Nothing is transmitted. There's no whisper moving through space or time. What exists instead is correlation. Two events are linked, not because one causes the other, but because they are part of the same underlying pattern. The universe, at its deepest levels, seems to allow for relationships that do not rely on distance or delay in the way we're used to. This can feel unsettling at first, especially when our intuition insists that all influence must flow like a signal. But nature does not always align with our habits of thought. Importantly, these correlations cannot be used to send information. No message can be encoded, no warning can be delivered, no instruction can be passed along. The connection reveals itself only when both sides are compared afterward. This limitation is not a flaw. It is a safeguard. It ensures that even the most intimate connections in nature do not unravel the structure of cause and effect. They do not allow the past to be rewritten or the future to be informed prematurely. They preserve the quiet order that time depends on. Why does this matter for our broader story? Because it shows us how easily mystery can be mistaken for access. When something behaves in an unfamiliar way, it is tempting to imagine that it offers shortcuts, ways around distance, delay, or even time itself. But the universe often surprises us not by breaking its rules, but by expressing them more subtly than we expect. These deep connections are not messages sent across time. They are reminders that nature can be unified without being communicative. Understanding this helps us keep our expectations grounded. If advanced civilizations exist, and if they understand these connections deeply, they would not see them as tools for signaling or travel. They would see them as part of the fabric, a structure to be respected, not exploited. This perspective also explains why ideas about instantaneous communication or temporal messaging persist. The human mind is drawn to narratives where mystery implies power, where hidden connections suggest hidden capabilities, but in reality the most powerful discoveries often come with constraints, boundaries that preserve balance. By recognizing these limits, we avoid turning wonder into anxiety. We allow curiosity to remain gentle. This session serves as a quiet pause in our journey, a moment to remind ourselves that not every strange phenomenon points toward intervention or oversight. Some simply reveal that the universe is more interconnected than our everyday experience suggests, and that interconnection does not need to be loud to be profound. As listeners, especially in the calm moments before sleep, it can be comforting to know that mystery does not always mean intrusion. That deep connections can exist without messages being sent. That the universe can be unified without being crowded. This understanding lowers the temperature of our speculation. It allows us to return to the silence with a clearer ear. The quiet sky above us is not pierced by invisible conversations we cannot hear. It is simply governed by rules that allow complexity without chaos, connection without interference, and in that balance there is a kind of peace. The universe does not rush to speak, it does not need to. Its deepest structures are already in harmony, revealing themselves slowly, only when we learn how to look without demanding answers too quickly. As this thought settles, the mystery becomes gentler, less like a door we cannot open, and more like a window we can look through, knowing that what we see does not have to reach back toward us to be meaningful. There is a particular kind of curiosity that does not seek to change anything. It simply wants to understand. You can feel it when you read an old letter or look at a photograph taken long before you were born. You're not there to interfere. You're not there to correct mistakes or offer advice. You're there to witness, to learn what it felt like to live in that moment with all its uncertainty intact. Now, imagine this curiosity carried forward not just by decades, but by centuries or millennia. Imagine a future civilization, far more patient than ours, looking back at its own origins, not with judgment and not with urgency, but with a kind of careful attention. The way an archaeologist brushes dust from a fragile artifact, knowing that the act of touching too hard could erase what they hope to preserve. This is the heart of what we might call temporal anthropology. Not a claim, not a prediction, but a way of thinking about how intelligence relates to its own past once it has learned restraint. From this perspective, the past is not something to be corrected, it is something to be understood. If advanced civilizations exist, and if they have learned to navigate time gently, then observing earlier eras may be far more valuable than interacting with them. Intervention introduces distortion, observation preserves authenticity. We already practice a small version of this principle. When scientists study endangered ecosystems, they often do so at a distance. Cameras replace footprints. Sensors replace presence. The goal is not to leave a mark, but to avoid one. Applied across time, the same logic holds. A civilization capable of looking into its own past would quickly realize that interference changes the very thing it hopes to study. Even small actions ripple outward. A word spoken, a tool introduced, a warning delivered too soon. History bends, and the original story is lost. So the safest approach is silence. From our point of view, this silence can feel unsettling. We imagine being watched and instinctively wonder why no one helps, warns, or intervenes. But this reaction comes from a present-focused mindset, from a belief that progress requires guidance. A more mature perspective recognizes that growth requires space. If future observers exist, their restraint would not signal indifference. It would signal respect. A recognition that each generation deserves to face its own questions, make its own mistakes, and discover its own balance. In this light, the idea of being observed becomes less threatening and more tender. It is not surveillance, it is attention without control. And importantly, this idea does not require advanced technology beyond imagination. It only requires patience and an understanding of fragility. The fragility of timelines, the fragility of causation, the fragility of stories that can be altered by even well-intentioned interference. This perspective also aligns with the remarkable consistency of history. If observation across time were common but intervention were rare, the past would remain largely intact, messy, complex, human, but not obviously manipulated. We would not expect to find clear signs of visitors. We would expect continuity. There is something quietly reassuring about this. It suggests that the universe, even if populated by advanced intelligence, is not a stage for constant intrusion. It is a place where stories are allowed to unfold naturally. The watchers, if they exist, are not directors, they are listeners. This idea also turns our attention inward. One day, far in our own future, we may face a similar choice. If we gain the ability to look back across time, how would we use it? Would we intervene, reshape, correct? Or would we choose restraint, trusting that the value of history lies in its authenticity? Asking this question now is not premature. It is a way of practicing humility. It reminds us that intelligence is not measured only by what it can do, but by what it chooses not to do. By its willingness to let complexity exist without forcing resolution. In a universe shaped by time, patience may be the highest form of wisdom. As this thought settles, the silence around us changes tone once again. It no longer feels like emptiness, it feels like space being held open. A respectful distance maintained across eras. We're not being ignored, we're being allowed to be ourselves. Our story is still being written, and if others are watching, from the future, from elsewhere along the timeline, they are doing so quietly, knowing that the most meaningful discoveries cannot be handed down. They must be lived. The universe, then, is not crowded with voices telling us what to do. It is filled with attention that knows when to remain silent, and in that silence, there is trust. Loneliness often comes from a simple misunderstanding. The belief that if we cannot see or hear others, they must not be there at all. But many kinds of separation are not about distance. They're about timing. Think of a familiar place, a cafe you love, a park you visit often. At certain hours it is full of voices and movement. At others, it is still. The benches are empty, the doors are closed. The silence does not mean the place has ceased to exist. It only means you arrived at a quiet hour. The universe may be like that. For a long time, we have measured cosmic loneliness in terms of space, how far away others might be, how difficult it would be to cross the distances between stars. But as our understanding deepens, a gentler explanation begins to take shape. What if the separation we feel is not spatial, but temporal? What if civilizations are not missing, but unsynchronized? In this view, the universe is not empty. It is layered. Histories unfold at different speeds. Cultures rise, mature, transform, and move on without necessarily overlapping. The cosmos becomes less like a crowded room and more like a long, winding timeline, with countless stories unfolding at different moments. This idea can feel strange at first, because we are accustomed to thinking of now as something shared. We imagine the present as a universal stage on which all actors must appear together. But time does not work that way. Each world has its own rhythm, each civilization its own pace. A society that reached maturity millions of years ago may no longer inhabit the same kind of present we do. Its loud phase may have passed. Its outward-facing curiosity may have settled into something quieter. From our vantage point, it seems absent. From its own, it is simply elsewhere along the flow of time. This is what we might gently call a temporal diaspora. Instead of spreading across space, civilizations spread across eras. They occupy different chapters of the universe's long story. Some are just beginning. Some are deep into reflection. Some may have chosen states of existence that minimize change, preserving continuity over expansion. In such a universe, overlap becomes rare. Not because life is uncommon, but because synchronization is difficult. Two civilizations might both exist for extraordinary length of time and still never share the same moment of outward expression. Their signals, their structures, their voices pass through different windows of time. This perspective softens the emotional weight of the silence. We are not standing alone on a barren stage. We are standing at a particular moment, listening outward, while others may be listening inward, or resting between acts, or existing in forms that do not announce themselves at all. There is comfort in this thought. It means that the universe does not need to be filled with neighbours pressing close on all sides in order to be alive. It can be rich without being crowded, full without being noisy. Loneliness, in this sense, becomes a temporary condition rather than a permanent truth, a function of where we are in time, not a statement about the universe as a whole. This also changes how we think about our own future. One day, humanity may reach a stage where expansion is no longer the central goal, where stability, understanding, and preservation matter more than presence. When that happens, our relationship with the universe may shift. We may become quieter, less visible, more careful about when and how we interact. From the perspective of a younger civilization, we would seem to disappear. And that is not a failure. It is a transition. The idea of a universe full but unsynchronized allows us to hold two truths at once, that we are early and that we are not alone, that our silence is real, and that it does not imply emptiness. It invites patience rather than urgency, curiosity without desperation, a willingness to accept that some answers arrive not through discovery, but through understanding our place in a much longer story. As this thought settles, the cosmos feels less cold. The quiet becomes a shared condition rather than a personal one. A pause between voices, not a void. We're not waiting for others to arrive. We're learning how to listen across time, and in doing so, we may discover that the universe has been full all along, just not speaking in the same moment we are. Imagine a vast library at night, not a busy one filled with footsteps and whispered conversations, but a quiet archive after closing hours. The lights are dimmed, the doors are locked, shelves stretch far into the distance, holding stories that no one is reading at this moment, but which remain intact, waiting. Nothing is happening, and yet everything is there. This image offers a gentle way to think about time and memory at a cosmic scale. If advanced civilizations learn restraint, patience, and care, then their relationship with history may begin to resemble that of a librarian rather than a visitor. Their goal would not be to step into the past and rearrange events, but to preserve records, to understand what happened without disturbing it. In this sense, time becomes a collection rather than a corridor. Each era is a volume, each civilization a chapter. Some books are well worn, their pages turned many times. Others are pristine, untouched for ages. All of them exist simultaneously within the structure of the library, even though only one can be read at a time. This metaphor helps us imagine how history might be accessible without being changed. Observation does not require participation. Understanding does not require interference. A reader can sit with a book for hours without altering a single word. The story remains what it has always been. For a civilization that understands the fragility of time, this distinction would be essential. Any attempt to alter the past risks damaging the record itself. But preserving it, studying it quietly, allows knowledge to accumulate without harm. This may explain why memory often outlasts presence. On Earth, many cultures no longer exist as living societies, but their ideas endure. Their art, language, and stories persist long after their voices have fallen silent. Presence fades, memory remains. If this pattern extends beyond our world, then the universe may be filled with preserved histories that are no longer actively expressing themselves. Civilizations that chose continuity over contact, understanding over expansion. From our perspective, this would look like absence. But absence is not the same as erasure. The library still stands even when no one is walking its aisles. There is something comforting in this thought. It suggests that the universe does not discard its stories. It keeps them, quietly, patiently, without urgency. Advanced civilizations, if they exist, may see themselves as caretakers of this vast collection. Their role would not be to announce themselves, but to ensure that knowledge survives intact across immense spans of time. In such a universe, communication becomes secondary. Preservation becomes primary. This also reframes the idea of legacy. We often imagine legacy as being remembered by others who come later. But legacy can also exist without witnesses. A story does not vanish simply because no one is reading it right now. It waits. If civilizations have learned this lesson, they may choose to leave behind records rather than signals, archives rather than broadcasts, traces designed to endure quietly, not to demand attention, and those traces may not be obvious to us yet. We are still early in our methods of reading the universe. Our instruments are tuned to noise, not to stillness, to flashes, not to shelves. The library metaphor reminds us that patience is required. Some knowledge cannot be discovered by searching loudly. It must be found by learning how to listen differently. This idea also invites humility. We are not yet librarians of time. We are still readers, learning how to open the first few books without tearing their pages. Our curiosity is genuine, but our tools are young. We're still learning how to preserve our own stories, let alone understand those of others. One day, far in the future, humanity may face a choice, whether to broadcast endlessly into the universe or to focus on safeguarding what we've learned, whether to leave behind a trail of noise or a carefully tended archive. The universe, it seems, rewards the latter. As this thought settles, the silence around us becomes less empty and more full of stories resting on shelves we have not yet learned how to reach, full of knowledge that exists without calling out. The quiet sky becomes a reading room rather than a void, a place where nothing appears to be happening, but where everything is held. And perhaps, when we are ready, we will learn how to open those books gently, without changing a single word. There is a word we use constantly without ever pausing to define it, a word that feels solid, unquestionable, and shared by everyone at once. That word is now, right now, at this moment, in the present. It feels obvious. You are here, listening, breathing. The present seems to gather everything into a single point, as if the entire universe were agreeing on what time it is. But gently, quietly, physics asks us to reconsider, not with equations or abstractions, but with a simple observation. Events that appear simultaneous from one perspective do not always appear simultaneous from another. Two observers, separated by distance or moving differently, may disagree about which events are happening at the same time. This is not a flaw in perception. It is a feature of how time works. Imagine standing on a long platform as a train passes by. A flash of light appears at the front of the train and another at the back. To you, standing still, they may seem perfectly synchronized. To someone riding the train, they may not. Neither view is wrong. Each reflects a different position within time structure. What this reveals is subtle, but profound. The present is not a single universal slice shared by all observers. It is local, personal, dependent on where you are and how you are moving. The universe does not keep one clock. This idea can feel unsettling at first, but it does not need to be alarming. It simply means that now is smaller than we often imagine. Not smaller in importance, but smaller in scope. Our present moment is real. It is meaningful. But it is not the only present that exists. Across the cosmos, countless nows unfold at once, each tied to its own path through time. They do not align neatly. They overlap imperfectly, like pages turned at slightly different moments in a vast book. This matters for our larger question. If civilizations exist elsewhere in the universe, their present does not need to coincide with ours. Even if they are nearby in space, they may be distant in time, not in the sense of past or future, but in the sense of synchronization. Two clocks can tick at different rhythms and still measure time accurately. Two civilizations can exist without sharing a common now. Recognizing this reshapes our expectations. We often imagine contact as something that happens when two beings occupy the same moment, but the universe does not require such alignment. Existence does not depend on simultaneity. This perspective brings humility. We're used to placing ourselves at the center of the present, imagining our moment as the reference point for everything else. Letting go of that assumption does not diminish us, it situates us. We become one frame among many, one scene in a story told from countless angles. Our now is meaningful to us, but it does not command the universe's attention. There is a quiet comfort in this realization. It removes pressure, the pressure to be heard immediately, the pressure to matter on a cosmic scale right away. Our moment does not need to overlap with others to be valid. This also helps explain the silence we have been exploring. If advanced civilizations exist in different temporal frames, their absence from our present is not a sign of emptiness. It is a sign of misalignment. They may exist in a now that is offset from ours, close enough to share the same universe, but not close enough in time to interact. From their perspective, we may already be past or not yet arrived. This does not make contact impossible forever. It simply means that contact depends on alignment as much as existence, on timing as much as technology. Understanding this allows us to relax our expectations. We no longer need to imagine the universe as withholding answers. It is simply unfolding at many speeds. The present, once seen as a single spotlight, becomes a constellation of overlapping moments, each real, each valid, each temporary. As listeners, especially in the quiet hours before sleep, this idea can be strangely soothing. It reminds us that urgency is not a cosmic requirement. That meaning does not depend on simultaneity. We are allowed to exist in our moment without comparison. One day, long after our current present has slipped into history, it will become part of someone else's past, perhaps even a carefully studied one. But for now, it is simply ours, and that is enough. As this thought settles, the word now loosens its grip. It becomes lighter, less demanding, a gentle marker rather than a universal command. The universe does not rush us. Time does not insist we align with everything else. We move at our own pace, within a vast tapestry of moments that never quite line up, and never need to. For many years, the search for others has been shaped by a simple hope that somewhere out there a signal is being sent, a deliberate message crafted to cross the vastness of space and arrive in our instruments like a greeting across the dark. We have listened carefully. We have built antennas, scanned frequencies, and trained algorithms to notice the faintest whisper that does not belong to nature alone. This effort is not naive. It is thoughtful, disciplined, and deeply human. It comes from a desire to know whether our experience is shared. But as our understanding of time deepens, it becomes clear that listening only for messages may be too narrow a way of asking the question. If civilizations are spread across time as much as space, then signals sent during one era may never reach listeners in another. Messages fade, technologies change, methods of communication come and go. A civilization may speak loudly for a brief span, then grow quiet long before its signal arrives anywhere meaningful. In such a universe, silence does not imply absence. It implies misalignment. This invites a gentler way of searching. Rather than focusing solely on communication, we might begin to look for patterns, not messages but structures, not greetings, but footprints left unintentionally, long-term changes that persist even after voices have faded. On Earth, archaeologists do not expect ancient civilizations to still be speaking. They look for traces, arrangements of stone, shifts in soil, subtle marks that reveal intention long after language has vanished. The search is quiet, careful, and slow. Applied to the cosmos, this becomes something like chrononautical archaeology, a way of asking not who is speaking now, but who may have passed through before, or who may pass through long after we are gone. This does not require us to abandon the search for signals. It asks us to expand it. We might look for unusual regularities in planetary systems, long-lived structures that resist natural decay, patterns that suggest deliberate maintenance rather than chance formation. These would not announce themselves loudly. They would reveal themselves only through patience and comparison. Such a search would unfold over generations. It would not promise immediate answers, and that is precisely why it aligns so well with a universe shaped by time. It also reshapes our emotional relationship with the search. Instead of waiting for contact, we begin to observe. Instead of hoping to be answered, we learn to listen differently. Curiosity replaces expectation. Wonder replaces urgency. This shift matters, because expectation can create disappointment. Listening without demand allows discovery to arrive quietly when it is ready. There's also a responsibility embedded in this approach. If we imagine future civilizations looking back at us, studying our era the way we study ancient cultures, then our actions today become part of the record we leave behind. The traces we create, technological, environmental, cultural, may one day be interpreted by minds far removed from our present concerns. This perspective encourages care. We're not only searching for others, we are becoming something that may one day be searched for. Our choices shape the kind of history we leave behind. In this way, the search becomes a mirror. It reflects our values, our patience, and our understanding of time. A civilization that searches gently is one that has learned to respect both presence and absence. The universe, seen through this lens, does not feel indifferent. It feels patient. It invites us to slow down, to widen our questions, and to accept that some answers may arrive long after we have learned how to ask them. As this thought settles, the act of searching transforms. It becomes less about finding proof and more about cultivating awareness, less about being acknowledged and more about understanding our place in a long continuum. We are not calling out into the void. We are listening within a tapestry of time, knowing that voices may rise and fall beyond our immediate reach. And that is not a failure of exploration. It is an invitation to maturity. The search for others does not end with silence. It begins there. As we reach the end of this long, gentle exploration, it helps to return to the feeling that started it all. The quiet question. That moment of looking up at the night sky and wondering why it feels so still. For a long time, that stillness has been interpreted as absence, as if the universe were empty of companionship and we were speaking into a void. But after all we've considered together, another possibility feels just as natural and far more comforting. We may not be alone. We may simply be early. Early does not mean insignificant. It means young. It means that our voice, loud and curious, is one of the first to echo through this particular stretch of time. And like many early voices, it carries excitement, uncertainty, and a desire to be heard. There is nothing wrong with that. Every long story begins with a first chapter. The early pages are often full of questions. The characters do not yet know how the story will unfold. They act, experiment, and sometimes make mistakes. Only later does the larger pattern become visible. Humanity may be in that early chapter now. We're learning how to listen, how to observe, how to understand the forces that shape our world and the wider universe beyond it. Our tools are improving, our questions are growing more careful, and slowly we're beginning to sense that time itself is a partner in this journey, not an obstacle. If other civilizations exist, or have existed, they may already be deep into later chapters. Chapters where the urgency to announce oneself has passed, where endurance matters more than expansion, where silence is chosen not out of fear, but out of understanding. Seen this way, the quiet sky is not a rejection. It is a pause that gives us space to grow into our role. This perspective also places a gentle responsibility on us. If we are early, then our actions help shape the tone of what follows. The way we treat our planet, our technologies, and one another becomes part of the record that future civilizations, human or otherwise, may one day look back upon. We are not just searching for others, we are becoming ancestors. That thought can feel heavy at first, but it does not need to be. It can also be grounding. It reminds us that care matters, that restraint matters, that learning when not to act can be just as important as learning how to act. The universe, as we've come to see it, does not reward noise alone. It rewards balance. There is a quiet dignity in imagining ourselves as a young voice, learning how to listen before learning how to speak wisely, learning how to preserve before learning how to reach, learning how to belong to time, rather than trying to outrun it. This does not diminish our curiosity, it deepens it. We can continue to explore, to observe, to ask questions, but without the pressure to force answers, without the fear that silence means failure. The universe does not owe us immediate confirmation. It invites patience instead. And patience, in a cosmos measured in billions of years, is not passive. It is a form of participation. As you rest with this idea, notice how the silence feels now. Less empty, less sharp, more like a wide field at dawn waiting for the day to unfold, full of potential even if nothing is moving yet. We are not standing at the end of the story, we're standing near its beginning. Others may come later, others may already have passed through, some may exist in moments that do not overlap with ours at all, and that is all right. Our task is not to rush toward them, nor to despair at their absence. Our task is to live our chapter well, to care for our moment in time, to learn what it means to be thoughtful. Participants in a universe that values continuity as much as curiosity. The sky above us remains quiet, but it no longer feels empty. It feels patient. And so, as this journey comes to a close, you can let that patience settle with you. Whether your eyes are still open or already drifting toward rest, know that this quiet does not isolate you. It places you gently within a much larger story, a story that stretches far beyond any single moment, a story in which being early is not a burden, but a beginning.